The evening sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky with shades of rust and gold, when Thomas Reed stirred the ashes of his small fire under the old bridge. The flicker of the flames danced on his worn face, a face that had seen too much of life and too little of mercy. Thomas was a veteran. Once a soldier, a man of discipline, pride, and purpose. Now, he was just another forgotten soul in a forgotten part of town, sleeping under a bridge with a torn blanket and a heart that still carried the weight of war. His shack, if one could call it that, was a collection of old plywood, rusted metal sheets, and a few plastic tarps. It barely stood against the wind, but it was his home. Every night, Thomas cooked what little he had, canned beans, bread if he was lucky, and sometimes nothing at all. That evening, he had managed to get a half-eaten sandwich from a diner's trash, not much, but enough to quiet the growl in his stomach. He sat by the fire, whispering a quiet prayer of gratitude, when the sound of rumbling engines shattered the silence of the night. It wasn't one or two motorcycles, it was a storm. The growl of Harley-Davidsons echoed beneath the bridge, their headlights slicing through the shadows. Thomas froze, instinctively reaching for the small pocket knife he kept beside him. Old habits from the battlefield never die. Then, he saw them, men in black leather vests, patches shining in the firelight. Hell's Angels, the words stitched across their backs. The kind of men you didn't look at for too long. Thomas lowered his eyes, hoping they would pass without notice. But fate had other plans. One of them, a tall man with slicked back hair and a heavy beard, broke away from the group and rode closer. His vest bore the American flag and the name Ryder. He parked his bike just a few feet away and killed the engine. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other, the homeless veteran and the biker leader, two worlds that were never meant to collide. "You got a light there, old man." Ryder's voice was deep, steady, with a roughness that came from years on the road. Thomas nodded, flicking his lighter. "Yeah, right here." He held it out, and Ryder lit his cigarette, inhaling deeply. "Thanks," he said, exhaling smoke that drifted into the chill night air. "You live here?" Thomas hesitated. "If you can call it that." Ryder looked around at the makeshift shelter and the small fire. "Must get cold at night." "It does," Thomas replied softly. "But I've been through worse." There was silence for a few seconds. Then, Thomas noticed something, the faint limp in Ryder's step, the scar across his knuckles. He'd seen men like that before, men who'd been through battles, just of a different kind. The biker didn't look like a criminal to him. He looked like a man trying to find his place in a world that no longer made sense. "You a vet?" Ryder asked suddenly. Thomas nodded. "Army. 82nd Airborne. Iraq." Ryder's expression changed, the hardness in his eyes softened. "Respect," he said, tapping his chest. "My old man wasn't numb. Never came back the same." Thomas gave a faint smile. "None of us do." For a moment, the air was heavy with shared understanding, two men who knew the language of loss without needing to speak it. Then Ryder's stomach growled, loud enough to make him laugh. "Guess I skipped lunch." Thomas looked down at the small pan on the fire. He had only a bit of beans and that half sandwich, barely enough for himself. But something inside him, maybe the soldier's instinct, maybe just human decency, made him say, "You can share mine. It ain't much, but it's warm." Ryder looked surprised. "You sure?" Thomas shrugged. "Ain't no use eatin' alone." So the biker sat beside the homeless veteran, and the two men shared that humble meal under the bridge. The fire crackled as they ate in silence, each bite a small act of grace between strangers. The rest of Ryder's crew watched from a distance, confused, their leader sitting with a homeless man, sharing food like old friends. When they finished, Ryder stood up. "You know something, old man? You didn't have to do that." Thomas smiled faintly. "I know. But it's what we're supposed to do." Ryder looked at him for a long moment before saying quietly, "You remind me of my dad." He reached into his vest and pulled out a few bills. "Here, take this." Thomas raised his hand. "No. I don't take charity." Ryder smirked. "Ain't charity, brother. It's respect." He placed the money on the ground beside the fire anyway. "You earned it." Then he turned and walked back to his bike. The engines roared to life again, and the Hell's Angels disappeared into the night like thunder fading in the distance. Thomas sat there for a long time, staring at the flames. He didn't touch the money. He just whispered, "God bless you, son." Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the warmth of the fire wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. But what Thomas didn't know was that his small act of kindness, that one shared meal, had touched Ryder more deeply than he could imagine. That night, as Ryder rode with his crew down the empty highway, he couldn't get the old man's face out of his mind. The cracked hands, the steady voice, the quiet dignity despite having nothing. He thought about how his own father had struggled after Vietnam, how society had forgotten the men who gave everything. He thought about how many nights his dad had gone hungry, too proud to ask for help. Ryder slowed his bike, signaling for the group to pull over. They stopped on the side of the road, the red glow of their taillights painting the pavement. "Boss, everything all right?" one of the bikers asked. Ryder took off his helmet and looked at the stars. "That man back there, the vet under the bridge, he shared his food with me when he barely had any." "You know what that means?" The others shook their heads. "It means we've been doing it wrong," Ryder said. "All the miles, all the fights, all the rides, and we forgot what brotherhood really is." Another biker, Snake, frowned. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Ryder nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning, we ride back. That man deserves better. We're gonna give it to him." The group exchanged looks. Some smiled. Some were stunned. But none disagreed. Because in that moment, the code of the road, loyalty, respect, and family, found a new purpose. As the night deepened, Ryder couldn't sleep. He spent the hours before dawn gathering his men, making calls, loading up their trucks. Word spread fast among their chapters, Hell's Angels rebuilding a vet's home. By sunrise, more than 50 bikers had shown up at the old bridge, armed not with weapons, but with hammers, lumber, and determination. Meanwhile, Thomas woke up to the sound of engines again. He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Not again," he muttered. But when he stepped outside, what he saw made him freeze. Dozens of bikers surrounded his shack. Trucks loaded with wood, tools, and supplies were parked nearby. Ryder stood at the front, grinning. "Morning, soldier," he said. "You gave me dinner. Now we're giving you a home." Thomas just stared, speechless. What is this?" Ryder put a hand on his shoulder. "Brotherhood. You earned it." The old veteran felt his eyes sting. For years, he had been invisible, a ghost in his own country. But now, these men, outlaws in the eyes of many, saw him, respected him, and honored him. As the bikers got to work tearing down his broken shack and rebuilding it from scratch, Thomas sat by his fire, tears running down his weathered cheeks. He whispered, "Thank you, Lord. I thought you forgot me." The rumble of engines, the clang of hammers, and the laughter of rough men filled the air that morning. Something beautiful was happening under that bridge, not charity, not pity, but pure, unfiltered humanity. And that's just where this story begins. The morning sun broke through the mist as 50 motorcycles lined up under the old bridge, their engines rumbling like thunder. The once silent corner of the city now roared with life. Bikers in leather vests with the Hell's Angels patch stood shoulder to shoulder, unloading tools, wood, and boxes of supplies. The smell of oil mixed with the scent of fresh-cut lumber. Thomas Reed stood there frozen, staring in disbelief. He'd seen miracles in war, men surviving impossible odds, but he never thought he'd see one here, in his own backyard. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice trembling. Ryder, the tall, bearded biker who had shared his meal the night before, clapped him on the shoulder. "You didn't have to feed me either, brother. But you did. So now it's our turn." And with that, the work began. The bikers split into groups. Some tore down the old shack piece by piece, others started measuring and sawing lumber. The sound of hammers, laughter, and engines filled the air. Even the nearby passers-by stopped to watch, a sight they couldn't believe. Hardened bikers, men with tattoos and scars, working like a construction crew, not for money, not for fame, but for one forgotten men who had once worn a uniform. Ryder led the charge. He lifted beams with his bare hands, nailed boards into place, and shouted orders like a foreman who'd been doing this all his life. Make it strong. This man's earned it, he yelled, his voice echoing under the bridge. Thomas watched, tears welling in his eyes. He tried to help, but the bikers wouldn't let him. Sit back, soldier, one of them said with a grin. You've done your part. Let us handle this mission. A younger biker, barely 30, brought Thomas a thermos of hot coffee and a bag of breakfast sandwiches. You eat, sir, he said respectfully. We'll take care of the rest. Thomas took the cup with shaking hands. Thank you, son. I don't deserve this. The young man smiled. You fought for us. That's more than enough. Hours passed. The bikers worked with a kind of passion that came from somewhere deep, not just the desire to build a shelter, but to rebuild dignity. They repaired the floorboards, insulated the walls, added windows that actually closed, and painted the wood a warm, earthy brown. They even installed a small porch with a chair, so Thomas could sit and watch the world go by. Ryder found an old American flag, patched it up, and hung it proudly on the front. You served under this, he said. You should live under it too. When the sun reached its highest point, the new shack stood complete, small but strong, neat but full of heart. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a statement. Thomas walked toward it slowly, his eyes wide, his lips trembling. He ran his hand across the smooth wooden walls, feeling the warmth of the sun on them. It's beautiful, he whispered. Ryder handed him a key. This one's yours. Door locks now, no one's taking what's yours again. Thomas looked at the key in disbelief, then hugged Ryder, something neither of them expected. You don't know what this means to me, he said, voice cracking. I thought the world forgot me. Ryder smiled softly. Not on our watch, brother. Not while we're still ridin'. The bikers cheered, revving their engines in salute. The roar was deafening, but to Thomas, it sounded like music, the kind of anthem only the broken and the brave understand. Then Ryder gathered the men and called out, listen up. This man showed us what real honor looks like. He had nothing, and still shared his meal with a stranger. That's what makes a man rich. Remember that. Cheers erupted. Helmets went on, engines growled again, and one by one, the Hells Angels mounted their bikes. But before they left, Ryder turned back and said, we'll check on you from time to time, all right? Your family now. Family, Thomas repeated softly. It's been a long time since I had one. The bikers rode off into the horizon, their engines fading into the distance like thunder after a storm. And there, under the bridge, Thomas sat on the porch of his new home, watching the flag flutter in the wind. For the first time in years, he felt warmth, not from the fire, but from people who still believed in brotherhood. As night fell, Thomas lit a small candle inside his new home. The flicker reflected in his eyes as he whispered, I was lost, but maybe God sent me angels on wheels. He smiled, a real, genuine smile, something that hadn't crossed his face in a long time. He placed a small note on his table that read, to those who gave me back my faith, thank you. Days later, a local journalist heard about the story and came to film it. The footage of rough, tattooed bikers rebuilding a veteran's shack went viral overnight. Millions watched and cried. Comments flooded in, faith in humanity restored. These are the real heroes. We need more people like this. Thomas became a symbol, not of pity, but of gratitude. Ryder's chapter of the Hells Angels received letters from all over the world. Veterans reached out. Homeless shelters got donations. Something had shifted, one small act of kindness had rippled across thousands of hearts. And every time someone asked Ryder why they did it, he'd simply smile and say, because one hungry man reminded us who we really are. Weeks had passed since that morning under the bridge. The sound of engines and hammers had long faded, replaced by quiet nights and soft winds rustling through the flags that now hung proudly outside Thomas Reed's new home. The shack that once looked like a forgotten pile of junk now stood firm, a symbol of hope. The wooden porch gleamed under the sun, the American flag swayed gently in the breeze, and Thomas was no longer just the homeless veteran. He had become something more, a story, a reminder, a heartbeat of humanity in a world that had forgotten how to care. He sat on that porch every morning, sipping the coffee that local volunteers now brought him. People came by to shake his hand, take photos, leave food, or just listen to his stories from the old days. For the first time in decades, Thomas had company, laughter, voices, and the warmth of community. It was overwhelming at first. He wasn't used to being noticed. He wasn't used to being seen. But every time someone thanked him or handed him something, he would simply smile and say, "Don't thank me. Thank the angels." Because deep down, Thomas knew, it wasn't about the shack. It was about the reminder that good still existed. One chilly afternoon, as the sky turned gray with clouds, a roar of engines echoed again in the distance. Thomas lifted his head, recognizing that familiar sound instantly. The angels were back. 50 strong, riding in formation, the same thunder that had changed his life before. The neighbors came out, watching as the motorcycles slowed to a stop near the bridge. Ryder, the bearded leader, removed his helmet, his grin wide as ever. "How's the new home treatin' you, soldier?" he shouted. Thomas laughed, his deep voice echoing. "Better than any place I've had in years." Ryder parked his bike, stepped forward, and shook Thomas's hand. "Good to hear, brother. We came back to check on you, and to tell you something." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Ryder turned and pointed toward a group of men walking behind him, men who didn't wear leather vests but military jackets, some with prosthetic legs, some with canes, all with weary eyes. "Veterans. These guys heard your story," Ryder said. "They saw what you did, and what it did for us. They wanted to meet you." Thomas stood slowly, his eyes misty. The veterans approached him one by one, shaking his hand, some hugging him, some just nodding silently. "You gave us hope, man," one of them said. "We thought nobody cared anymore." Thomas swallowed hard. "I didn't do nothing special." "Yes, you did," said another vet. "You reminded the world that kindness ain't dead." Ryder placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "We're starting something new, a program. A partnership between our chapter and local vets. We're gonna call it the Brotherhood Project. We rebuild shelters, homes, whatever's needed. You're the first one, Thomas. The first story. The one that started it all." Thomas stared at him in disbelief. "You mean, this is gonna keep going?" Ryder smiled. "Yeah, brother. Because one hot meal turned into 50 bikers. 50 bikers turned into a movement. And now, who knows?" For a long moment, Thomas couldn't speak. He looked at the veterans standing there, men who, like him, had been forgotten. He looked at the bikers, rough on the outside but pure-hearted within. And he realized something profound, maybe his whole life had led to this. Maybe every hard night, every lonely year, had been building toward this one purpose, to remind others of what humanity could be. They spent the day together, sharing food, laughing, telling stories. Cameras showed up again. Local news stations covered it, calling it the Angel's Promise. The footage went viral once more, but this time, it wasn't just a feel-good story. It was a spark. People across the country began to act. A motorcycle club in Texas rebuilt a veterans' trailer. Another in Michigan organized a food drive for homeless vets. In California, a group of ex-soldiers and bikers teamed up to restore a shelter. It was as if kindness had become contagious, all because one homeless man had shared his meal without asking for anything in return. That night, after everyone had gone, Thomas sat alone again under the stars. But this time, it wasn't the same loneliness. The world had changed around him, and so had he. He pulled out a small notebook, something a volunteer had given him, and began to write. His handwriting was rough, shaky, but honest. "I once thought I was forgotten. I thought my life didn't matter anymore. But the truth is, God doesn't forget any of us. Sometimes, He just waits for the right moment to show us that we still have a purpose. I gave a man half a sandwich. And he gave me back my life." He closed the notebook and smiled. The fire flickered in front of him, not a fire of survival anymore, but of peace. Weeks later, Thomas started volunteering himself. He joined Ryder and the Angels in rebuilding other shelters. He wasn't as strong as before, but he painted walls, fixed doors, and, most importantly, listened to other vets. "I know how it feels," he'd say softly. "But I promise, it gets better." The media tried to follow him everywhere, wanting interviews, photos, stories. But Thomas wasn't interested in fame. He just wanted to give back what he'd been given. One day, as the crew finished another rebuild for a Vietnam vet named Carl, Ryder came up to Thomas and said, "You know, you could have given up a long time ago. But you didn't." Thomas looked at the shining new shack they'd built and smiled. "Because someone showed me what hope looks like." Ryder nodded. "Nah, brother. You showed us." The two men stood there quietly, watching the flag above the new home flap in the wind, the same symbol that had united them, from war zones to open roads. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas looked out at the line of bikes, the men who had become his family, and said, "You know, Ryder, maybe there really are angels on Earth. They just trade wings for wheels." Ryder chuckled. "Damn right, old man. Damn right." The engines roared again, echoing across the valley. The Hells Angels rode into the dusk, leaving trails of dust and light behind, modern knights of the road, bound by something deeper than leather and steel. And Thomas? He stood on his porch, watching them go, the flag waving above him like a promise. He didn't have riches, fame, or power, but he had peace. And that was worth everything. Before heading inside, he looked at the camera that still sat on a tripod. The reporter had left it recording earlier. He leaned close, his weathered face filling the frame. "If you're watching this," he said softly, "remember something: kindness costs nothing, but it can build everything. Don't wait for someone else to change the world. Be the first to do it. You never know who you might save, including yourself." He smiled, turned off the light, and closed the door to his small wooden home. Outside, the wind carried the echo of engines far into the night, and somewhere in that sound, the world found a little more hope. It had been nearly a year since that night when the thunder of Harley engines first filled the space beneath the bridge. The world had moved on, but for Thomas Reed, every morning still began the same way, with gratitude. The veteran who once woke to the sound of silence and despair now woke to laughter, to birds singing near the trees, to the hum of passing cars that sometimes slowed down just to wave at him. He had become more than just a man with a rebuilt shack, he had become a symbol. Across the country, people knew his story. The photo of Thomas shaking hands with Ryder, the Hells Angel who changed everything, had become iconic. Newspapers called it the fire of Brotherhood. Churches spoke of it in sermons. Schools used it as a lesson in compassion. And what started as one rebuilt shack had now turned into something no one had expected, a movement that wouldn't stop growing. The Brotherhood project had expanded to over a dozen states. Bikers and veterans worked side by side, rebuilding homes, repairing roofs, delivering food to shelters, and even helping kids in poor neighborhoods. The same men who once carried reputations of rebellion were now building legacies of respect. Ryder often said, "We're still outlaws, just for a better cause." Thomas became their heart, their quiet compass. Every time a project began, they'd call him, and he'd show up, even if just to share a few words with the crew. He'd say, "This hammer here, it's not just wood and metal. It's a second chance for someone who thought the world forgot them." And every time, the workers would nod, gripping their tools tighter, working harder. But even as the world celebrated him, Thomas remained humble. His home was still simple, the same wooden shack under the bridge, though now surrounded by flowers planted by local kids. He never wanted more. All he wanted was to keep giving back. Then came the day that would change everything again. One early morning, Ryder arrived on his bike, not alone this time, but with a small convoy of trucks. He stepped off, walked up to Thomas, and said, "Brother, we've got something to show you." Thomas chuckled. "You boys always got surprises, don't you?" Ryder grinned. "This one's special. Hop in." They drove for nearly an hour, past highways, towns, and open fields, until they stopped in front of a large, empty lot on the outskirts of the city. It was surrounded by wooden stakes, marking future construction. Thomas looked confused. "What's all this?" Ryder turned to him, smiling softly. "This is your idea, old man. You just didn't know it yet." He handed Thomas a blueprint rolled in a tube. The veteran opened it, and his breath caught in his throat. The drawing showed a wide, low building with 10 small cabins around it. At the center, a large flagpole. And across the top of the paper, the words read, "The Reed Home, Veterans Transition Center." Thomas blinked. What is this?" Ryder placed a hand on his shoulder. A place for veterans who don't have a place to go. A home for the ones still fighting their battles. We're building it, in your name. Thomas felt his knees weaken. Ryder, I don't deserve this. Yes, you do, Ryder said firmly. You started all this. You reminded us that even one meal shared can change a man's life. You gave us something to believe in again. This center is for you, and for every brother who ever thought the world forgot him. For a long time, Thomas couldn't speak. He just stared at the empty land as tears rolled down his cheeks. God, you really don't forget, do you? He whispered. Construction began the next week. The roar of engines returned, not as chaos, but as a promise. The angels came from all across the country, more than 100 of them, joined by volunteers, veterans, and even local families. Reporters came too, but Ryder told them, put the cameras down. This ain't for headlines. It's for home. Thomas worked alongside them every day, painting, sanding, helping however he could. He didn't rest, even when the others told him to. This is my fight now, he'd say. And I ain't quittin' till the job's done. Months passed. When the project was finally complete, the Reed home stood proud under the wide blue sky, a beautiful structure of stone and wood, with rooms for veterans, a kitchen that could feed dozens, and a small garden out back. The cabins around it offered shelter to men and women rebuilding their lives, and at the heart of it all stood a large bronze plaque. The Reed Home. Built by the Brotherhood of the Road. Dedicated to Thomas Reed, whose kindness lit the fire that changed us all. The day of the opening, hundreds gathered. Reporters, veterans, bikers, families, even the mayor showed up. But for Thomas, it wasn't about the crowd. It was about what it meant. He stood before the flagpole, holding Ryder's hand, and said softly into the microphone, when I shared that meal, I wasn't thinking about nothing big. I was just hungry, and didn't want to eat alone. But maybe that's the secret, maybe the world gets better when we stop eating alone. The crowd erupted in applause. After the ceremony, Thomas walked through the halls quietly, smiling at the veterans moving in. He shook hands, told jokes, even helped one man fix his bed frame. And as the sun set that evening, Ryder found him sitting by the flagpole again, looking peaceful. You all right, brother? Ryder asked. Thomas smiled faintly. I'm more than all right. For the first time in a long time. I think I can rest easy. Ryder nodded. You earned that rest. They sat together in silence, watching the flag wave gently above the center. The engines in the distance rumbled like a hymn. That night, Thomas went to bed early. He lay down in his small room, the one they built just for him, with a photo of his old unit on the wall and a folded flag beside it. As the moonlight streamed through the window, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord. You gave me brothers again." And with a soft smile, Thomas closed his eyes. The next morning, the sun rose bright and golden over the Reed home. Birds sang, and the flag fluttered proudly. But Thomas didn't wake. He had passed peacefully in his sleep, a soldier finally at rest, surrounded by the family he'd helped create. When Ryder found him, he didn't cry, not right away. He just sat beside his old friend, gripping his hand, and whispered, "You did it, brother. You really did it." That day, the angels gathered once more. They didn't ride in silence, they roared across the city, hundreds strong, a final salute to the men who'd reminded them what honor meant. At the Reed home, they lowered the flag to half-mast, and every biker, veteran, and volunteer stood with heads bowed. Ryder placed Thomas's old army tag into the soil beneath the flagpole and said, "This house stands because of you, soldier. And as long as engines roar and hearts beat, your fire will never die." Years later, the Reed home became one of the largest veteran outreach centers in the country. Thousands were helped, hundreds rebuilt their lives, and every one of them knew the name, Thomas Reed, the men who once had nothing, but gave everything. And somewhere, beneath the wide open sky, a whisper seemed to echo through the rumble of motorcycles. Kindness never dies. It just rides on.